there's an old saying, behind every successful man, there's a woman, a loving, giving, caring woman. But you wouldn't know about that, Dan, because there's no old saying about what's behind a miserable failure.
Jane, you ignorant slut.
This Saturday Night Live skit, known for its crude, late-night humor, has significantly increased in popularity since its original broadcast in 1979. Since being uploaded to YouTube in 2017, it has amassed over 4.5 million views, showcasing enduring appeal over the 4 decades after its initial airing. But do viewers understand the root of the joke? The Fairness Doctrine, once a prominent piece of legislation, has faded into obscurity since its repeal. The reversal of this regulation marked a turning point in civil discourse, and subsequently our media has undergone irreversible changes, diverging permanently from the ideals originally set by the Fairness Doctrine.
Point out you're a foreigner, a redcoat, you're telling us what to do.
The irreversible turning point in American media occurred with the 1987 repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, a pivotal moment in the nation's media and political landscape. The Fairness Doctrine had been the subject of prolonged national debates regarding its constitutionality.
I believe strongly in the First Amendment. I don't think the FCC should be involved in censorship of content based on political speech or opinion.
The repeal marked a significant shift. The once monitored broadcasting environment became unregulated, fostering an unfettered media landscape. This transformation laid the groundwork for the highly polarized news culture prevalent today.
In 1949, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, introduced the Fairness Doctrine as a communications policy to ensure that broadcasters covered controversial issues of public importance over the public airwaves in an unbiased and nonpartisan manner. Importantly, the Fairness Doctrine applied solely to public airwaves, as they were accessible to everyone, distinguishing them from newspapers and magazines, which were paid for and therefore unregulated. Violations of the Fairness Doctrine led to penalties such as requiring broadcasters to include other viewpoints or even revoking their licenses. During this period, the majority of Americans had a radio in their home, therefore making it mainstream media. These radios included a few select programs that were networked through long telephone lines that stretched across the country. There were only 2,881 radio stations and 98 television stations when the Fairness Doctrine was created, compared to the 10,000 radio stations and close to 1,400 television stations that were in use when the Fairness Doctrine was removed. Ultimately, the growth of media and technology culminated in the decision that the Fairness Doctrine was unconstitutional. The Fairness Doctrine was controversial throughout its role in American media. One facet of the argument presented a positive impact, as it stimulated compromise and encouraged individuals to comprehend both sides of the story, empowering them to draw their own conclusions. In 1955, Thurgood Marshall appeared on the TV station WLBT in Jackson, Mississippi, to address the win of the Brown v. Board of Education case. In the middle of Marshall's address, the station purposefully cut the broadcast by displaying a screen reading, "Sorry, cable trouble in New York." The general manager of the station did not try to hide the fact that it was cut because of the station's racial bias. This occurrence was the turning point that sparked local activists to hold the station accountable for violating the Fairness Doctrine by going to court in hopes of withdrawing the station's broadcasting license. Their claims were upheld by the Court of Appeals when it ruled against WLBT. This is the only station that was ever cut for violating the Fairness Doctrine. Listeners were empowered by the expectation that both sides of the story would be reported. On the contrary, the Fairness Doctrine was being exploited for political pursuits. It is speculated that the Kennedy and Johnson administrations used it to silence conservative radio commentators who shed doubt on their administrations. However, this exploitation also occurred with conservatives such as Nixon, who also used it as a tool to build his following. Conservative activists, including Phyllis Schlafly and Reed Irvine, saw the doctrine as a tool to further their campaigns and make conservative voices in places they were once omitted. Conversely, some individuals believed it infringed on First Amendment rights, with broadcasters hesitating to cover controversial issues due to the perceived difficulty in presenting all points of view, like segregated schools. Both sides of the aisle were being affected both positively and negatively due to the Fairness Doctrine, seen in the opinions of prominent leaders in both parties. Republican Senator Jesse Helms and Democratic Senator Edward Kennedy opposed the repeal of the doctrine. Both Democratic Governor Mario Cuomo and Republican President Ronald Reagan wanted the Fairness Doctrine repealed. Starting in the 1980s with the anti-regulatory conservative movement, the Fairness Doctrine began to be challenged on another level. In 1986, the D.C. Court Circuit ruling gave the Fairness Doctrine less power, and on August 4, 1987, the Fairness Doctrine was unanimously repealed by the FCC after years of deliberation. This conclusion was made due to the growing technological advances in the U.S. The creation of cable TV devalidated the Fairness Doctrine on the grounds that cable TV could not be regulated by the FCC because it was not public airwaves.
This was an irreversible turning point in U.S. media broadcasting history. What was once starkly perceived as right and wrong, black and white, was now messy, as there were no boundaries or regulations.
Feminism was established so as to allow unattractive women easier access to the mainstream of society.
Almost immediately after the FCC declared the Fairness Doctrine unconstitutional, America's media landscape transformed. Talk radio, which was once nearly non-existent, with only 2 stations nationwide in 1960, was now leading the charge of polarized media with over 1,300 stations nationwide by 1955. This surge in talk radio was led by conservative hosts like Rush Limbaugh and Bob Grant, which is reflected by the fact that 70% of talk radio listeners in 1955 were conservative-leaning. These talk radio listeners felt emboldened by the conspiracy and personal connection. Due to the growth in technology and television options, cable TV was cited as a major reason for the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine. As more people started using cable TV as a means to get information, the regulation on public airwaves became less effective. However, that is not to say that cable was not affected by the Fairness Doctrine. After seeing the success of talk radio on a widespread level, cable networks began to believe that they could benefit from switching to a more partisan approach as well. Fox News was launched in 1996 and was overseen by Roger Ailes, who was a well-known Republican media consultant and who had produced Rush Limbaugh's talk show for 4 years. This was magnified during the Clinton administration, when Fox News capitalized on the mistakes of President Clinton. In contrast, MSNBC and CNN focused on affirming the administration while avoiding discussion on the president's missteps. The advances in modern computing and the internet made it possible for people to look up anything at any time. With this, it became impossible to look at every source due to the growing database of media options. People began seeking information from only 1 or 2 stations, which led to a growth in close-mindedness. These technological advances ultimately culminated in the stark polarization of American media.
News broadcasting has become so polarized that viewers can watch 2 news stations and feel as though they are living in 2 entirely different worlds. Nevertheless, reinstating a Fairness Doctrine on the same grounds as 1949 would be impossible due to the growth of the internet and cable television. These technological advances were major turning points and have created a media climate in which viewpoints are not challenged. Scholars are still debating the morals of the Fairness Doctrine, and they are discussing the rights that are in jeopardy both with and without it. The end of the Fairness Doctrine and the rise of the internet have shifted the responsibility of checking credible sources to the consumer. This turning point of responsibility will take time and education. Will Americans learn to listen and debate respectfully with one another? The future has yet to be written, and the sources have yet to be checked.